or chat me when we're online. Cool? Sounds good. Hello, good afternoon. We'll get started in a minute. It's 1 o'clock and 39 seconds, so we'll just wait another minute or so before we get started. As we're waiting to officially get underway, if you want to type in the chat maybe something that stood out from your Rosh Hashanah experience this last week, something that either was similar to past years that you continued the same tradition, or if there's something that you did a little different that stood out to you, that was meaningful. Would love to hear some of those reflections, since it was a pretty unique high holiday so far. Oh, Gary, go ahead, Gary. You want to share something before we get started?
Not enabled right now, so we can't do it.
Oh, chat's not enabled? Oh,
Right.
interesting. Don, maybe you
Working
could.
on it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Gary, for raising that so we can fix it. Go ahead, Merle.
Just that I felt very calmer this year than on a lot of years.
How so? What made this year calmer for you?
Not having to rush to get to temple and, look for seats for the whole family and save seats, and the whole routine just, I mean, as much as I don't like being home for that, it felt really good.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting when we think about the holidays. There's so much. Oh, happy birthday, Meryl. Uh, there is so much that goes into the high holidays that come outside the scheme of the actual services themselves, right? We spend the ritual extends beyond sitting in those seats and listening to the prayers and participating. It goes into what time you leave, your routine for getting dressed and prepared to get out the door, getting out the door, figuring out where you're going to go and park, if you have the same place every year or not, and what it means to walk through the halls and get to your seats. So all of those other parts of the ritual that are just as powerful and as important, and sometimes can be completely unnerving and and stressful, and at the same time become so built in that can feel weird when we don't have those experiences. Okay, well, couple other hands. Susan, I'll let you say one thing and then we'll get to the text, and then if we have more reflections afterwards, I'd love to hear them. Go ahead, Susan.
Yes, I agree with Merle. This was beautiful. And it was so poignant. It brought tears to my eyes. They were all in this together. The service, the Judaism still continues. All of the other stuff, the frantic hours before rushing or trying to get there. I missed greeting people, but on the other hand, this was more calm. And it was so beautiful, and you could focus very well on the service, and I loved the sermons. The singing was beautiful, and I thought it was just wonderful.
So, Susan, if you had the choice next year between the same experience you had this year, or and let's say we offered either you can stay at home, have a similar style experience from your home, or you can come into the sanctuary and have services, which would you choose, Susan?
You mean without a coronavirus? If there
Assuming
were
that there was, assuming that there would be, ways in which people could safely come into the building, or groups of people, what would you choose?
it's kind of a flip. with any doubt, any suspicion of corona, I would absolutely want to stay at home. I mean,
Right.
even if the restrictions were lifted. Um, it's a toss-up. Ask me next year.
Okay. I'll ask you next year. Well, no, next year we'll have a better sense of what options actually exist, right? So it'll be fascinating to see. I think it'll be really interesting to see how all of these community. I mean, there's so much good content out there. I wish I could have even more time to go through all the different services and the ancillary source material and creative things that have been put out there by institutions, by synagogues, by just regular Jews who are not professionals, all kinds of really amazing things out there. The interpretations of text through visuals and music. There's a lot for all of us to peruse now in a way that we haven't in past years. So we'll see how Yom Kippur goes, and yes, I know. I know. For me, the one thing that's standing out to me when I think about Yom Kippur is usually the intensity of nonstop going and greeting people, and the physical movements make fasting a lot easier. And so this year there will be less of that. So will I feel the fast in a different way? Because for the most part, the day flies by very quickly. So we'll see. Okay. Again, thank you for joining me. There are only a few of our sessions left, so I've been thinking a little bit about how I want us to end this class in 2 weeks. And I'm thinking that, as I mentioned before last week, this idea of a siyum, of some kind of completion of our learning together, I'd love to put it out there to offer to anyone who wants to take a piece of one of the texts that we've studied. So by our last session, there will be 28 texts that we've studied together. For you to choose one piece of one text or one learning that you've gained from one of these texts that's going to stick with you. And I will then invite you and bring you on as a panelist so we can actually see you, because I know none of you know how many people are on here or what anyone looks like unless you join other classes. But to lift the veil and for you to be revealed in your teaching on our final day, and for people to take no more than 2 to 3 minutes. So we'll keep it brief, but if there's something that stands out to you, you can write something up, whatever it is, or you can just speak freely. But anyone who'd like to do that, to teach us, you already do. So many of you teach me and all of us on a regular basis with your interpretations of these texts. But I would love to invite anyone who wants to reflect on something that stood out from any of our texts. I think the best way would be for you just to email me. It's on all of the source sheets that you receive from me. So it's rabbijoel@wbtla.org. And just let me know that you'd like to take the opportunity on our last class not next Thursday, but the Thursday after. And then I'll see who'd like to teach, and I can pop up a text on the screen if you'd want, or I'll just bring you up onto the screen, and you can teach us for a couple minutes about what stands out about that text or what you're going to take with you as we end the class. So I would like anyone who wants to. I know there are some of you who speak regularly and participate every single week, and some of you who are here on a regular basis and don't necessarily bring your voice into the conversation, but you're just digesting the material. So I want to give people the opportunity, whether you speak regularly or you don't speak up that much, if you want to take the plunge, so to speak, and teach us a little, I would love that opportunity. So please just reach out to me over email and let me know if you'd like to do something, and I can talk through it with you, and we'll come up with a plan. And so think about that. Okay, on to our text. Before we get into the text, obviously, now you do have the chat function. Thank you, Don Levy, behind the scenes, for allowing everyone to have that option. You should have the Q&A, I hope, button, and of course, the virtual raising of the hand. So we'll go through the text, and then we'll open it up to any other thoughts or reflections from your end. So we'll begin with the blessing for engaging in the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher krishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who commands us to engage in the study of Torah. So we will begin today. I chose two texts along the theme of apologies, forgiveness. Two short texts. They're not so difficult to interpret, but I thought, given the theme that of Yom Kippur coming up, that we could look at these two texts and see what it sparks for you, since we are in these 10 days right now where we are supposed to be at a higher level of understanding forgiveness and teshuvah. And so let's look at this. Okay. Of course, I'll read through them and then we'll go back and dig into them a little more. First one is from Yoma 87a. It is further related that Rav had a grievance against a certain butcher who had insulted him. The butcher did not come before him to apologize. On Yom Kippur Eve, Rav said, "I will go and appease him." He met his student, Rabbi Huna, who said to him, "Where is my master going?" He replied, "I am going to effect a reconciliation with the butcher." Rav Huna said, "Abba is going to kill a person." Rav went and stood by the butcher who was sitting and breaking the bones of an animal. The butcher raised his eyes and saw Rav. He said to him, "Are you Abba? Go away. I have nothing to say to you." While he was breaking the bones of the head, one of the bones shot out and struck him in the throat and killed him. End of story one. Okay, moving on to story number two. This one from Sota 47a. What is the incident of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Parachia and his student? When King Yanai was killing our rabbis, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Parachia was hidden by his sister, wife of the king. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Parachia then fled to Alexandria in Egypt. On the resumption of peace, Simeon ben Shetach sent to him, "From Jerusalem, the holy city, to you, Alexandria in Egypt, my sister, my master dwells within thee, and I am desolate." Upon receiving this letter, Rabbi Yehoshua said, "From this I infer that there is peace in Jerusalem." And he left Alexandria to return to Jerusalem. Along the way, he found himself in a certain inn, where great honor was shown him. He sat and praised the hostess. "How nice is this hostess?" Thereupon one of his students observed, "Rabbi, her eyes are round or narrow," depending on the interpretation. Rabbi Yehoshua rebuked him, saying, "Wicked one, is this with what you occupy yourself?" He sounded 400 trumpets and excommunicated the student. Every day, the student came before him pleading for Rabbi Yehoshua to forgive him, but he would not receive him. One day, Rabbi Yehoshua was reciting the Shema when the student came before him. Rabbi Yehoshua intended to receive him and made a sign to him. The student, thinking that the hand motion was to push him away, went, put up a brick, and worshipped it. Subsequently, Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, "Repent." He replied, "I have thus learned from you. Whoever sins and causes others to sin is not given the opportunity to repent." And a master has said, "This student practiced magic and led them astray and caused Israel to sin." Okay, those are our two texts. We're now going to go back. Of course, this is about apology, forgiveness, the lack thereof, of holding grudges, the impact of holding grudges, and the impact of not forgiving someone else. So I want you to be thinking about that. And of course, since these aren't the deepest of stories in the sense that they're hard to understand, I really want you to be thinking about more, what is the application in your own life? Do these resonate? What elements of these stories resonate with you? Where have you seen yourself in some of these characters? And because I really want this to be, this week especially, is really a time more for reflection. So that's why I wanted to go with the text. Of course, the first one references Yom Kippur. But I also want to talk a little bit or hear what your thoughts are about the pain of forgiveness, because both of these stories do talk about pain, that forgiveness and the lack of forgiveness come with pain and destruction. And well, maybe we do focus on that, but usually forgiveness is supposed to be seen as this way of cleansing ourselves and really focusing on the benefit of what happens once we do forgive. And here, these are warnings against what happens when we don't go through that process. And it's sometimes easy to not go through that process. It's sometimes a lot easier not to. So let's read them one more time. I'll offer a few little insights and then open it up if there are any thoughts or reflections from any of you. Okay, so going back to The first one, Yoma. So Yoma, by the way, deals with this. The section of Yoma deals with the laws of Yom Kippur. So it's appropriate that this story comes up in the section about that. And it says, it is further related that Rav had a grievance against a certain butcher who had insulted him. So there's a rabbi, there's a butcher. The butcher insulted the rabbi. And so he has this grudge, he has this grievance against this butcher. And the butcher did not come before him to apologize. We could assume, since Rav is a famous, he also goes by Rava, is a famous rabbi. Now this butcher is basically, has put himself in a position with this very well-known rabbi. He's insulted him. And the butcher has not come to apologize to this figure who is a figurehead in the community, but also a rabbi, and someone who we would assume if the butcher were to go to the rabbi and apologize, things would end in a nice way. So it's a Yom Kippur Eve, so it's really at that last moment between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur where we are supposed to go through this process of tshuva, and the process of tshuva not only, as we know, between us and God, but really between us and other people. And that's the hardest. Those are the hardest types of tshuva for us to work on. Rav said, I'm going to go and appease him. I'm going to go and figure out how to make amends with this butcher. So he met his student, Rabbi Huna, who said to him, where are you going? It's the eve of Yom Kippur. We would assume all the rabbis are getting ready, as we've heard in other stories on the air of Yom Kippur, as people are preparing for Yom Kippur. This is a really clear moment where there is an intensity with what you do on Erev Yom Kippur and Kol Nidre and what can happen in that moment. And Rav replies, I'm going to effect a reconciliation with the butcher. And so, in other words, I am going to try and force some kind of reconciliation with this butcher so I don't go into Yom Kippur with this, this conflict. And Rav Huna said, well, Abba is going to kill a person. As this, he knows what's going to happen in some way. Abba is another name for Rav. So Rav went and he stood by the butcher who was sitting and breaking bones of an animal, getting ready, I guess, for Yom Kippur or not. It's interesting that on the eve of Yom Kippur, the butcher is still doing his work, his daily work. And this could be an example of one of the challenges of people who are unwilling to go through a process of forgiveness is their inability to see that there is a time and a place for certain things and certain actions. And in this case, if you continue to just go through your day-to-day life without seeing differentiation between times of day, between the emotional states of yourself or those around you, then there's a flaw in that we have to be aware of the shifts that are occurring around us. The butcher raised his eyes and saw Rav, and he said to him, are you Abba? Which is weird because he does know that this is Abba. They've had a conflict before, so why is he asking him this? Maybe just to kind of really push him a little, as if to knock him down off the pedestal once again and say, oh, you're not special. Go away. I have nothing to say to you. And while he was breaking the bones of the head, one of the bones shot out and struck him in the throat and killed him. Okay? So the end of the first story, the butcher dies, as Rabbi Huna had prophesied was going to happen. And so we have here the ultimate failure of what happens when you do not apologize and you don't go through that process of tshuva. What ends up happening? You can end up dying. A very intense ending, but of course, the lesson here is there is such a destructive force of not being willing to get to a place of reconciliation with someone else, that can destroy you. And it's not just destroying the relationship, but if we think about those relationships that we have that are supposedly irreconcilable, are they truly irreconcilable? Have we done everything we can to try and fix them? And some of you may say, yes, I've done everything I can. There is nothing more I can do. This isn't that situation. I would say that would be a different situation when you have tried to do that work. But here, in this case, this is a person who is unwilling to do that. And as a result, it ends with death, the end. That tshuva is so central that if we can't go through that process, that it is going to end us. So that's the first story. Then let's go to the second one, and then we'll open it up for any reflections on either source one or source two. Okay, Sota. Sota, by the way, is the section that deals with this interesting ritual that you find in the book of Numbers about a woman who is accused of adultery. She has to come and drink some bitter waters, and if she drinks the bitter waters and something happens, then she has committed adultery or not. And so this is a section that deals with the complexities of this weird ritual that exists. So we have this incident of Rabbi Yehoshua. The rabbis ask, what is the incident between Rabbi Yehoshua and his student? Well, when King Yanai was killing our rabbis, just so you have a little bit of background here, this is referring to a story that's found in Ketubot on page 66a. And the story there is this man who's really upset with the rabbis and is just a overall kind of curmudgeon-y man, goes to the king and says, you are the powerful person in this land. You should diminish the power of the rabbis, and basically gets this king to ultimately destroy and kill the rabbis. And so it's a more complex story. You can go and find it again, Kiddushin 66a, if you really want to dive into that. But it's referring to something, another story. And here, one of the rabbis, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Prachia, was hidden. That's why he didn't die, along with all the other rabbis of the Sanhedrin. And actually, he was the head of the Sanhedrin. And so he was hidden by his sister, who was the wife of the king. And Rabbi Yehoshua then fled to Alexandria in Egypt. So he got out of there and somehow he was saved. And on the resumption of peace, this man, Simeon ben Shetach, sent to him and said, I'm in Jerusalem, the holy city, and you are in Alexandria, and you are there and I am here, and as a result, we're missing you. We in Jerusalem need you. We need your power. We need your authority. We need you to return. And so upon getting this and receiving this letter, Rabbi Yehoshua says, well, from this I can infer that there's finally peace in Jerusalem and that I can now return back to Jerusalem from my place in Alexandria, where I've been hiding and staying with all the challenges that have been occurring in Jerusalem. So he goes back, and along the way, as he's going back to Jerusalem, he finds himself at a certain inn, and he's given lots of honor there. And he sat and he praised the hostess and said how nice she is. She's a wonderful hostess. And one of his students said in response, well, Rabbi, her eyes are narrow or round. And we can assume by this that this is basically saying that the student thinks that the hostess is ugly, or something along those lines. Rabbi Yehoshua you could either see it as she's ugly or I guess she's beautiful. One of the two, but I think the implication here is the focus on the fact that the narrow and it's implied here that he's not looking at her fondly, but instead he's looking at her physical appearance and putting it down. So Rabbi Yehoshua rebuked him and said, wicked one, is that what you occupy yourself with? Are you spending your time not only focusing on the physicality of this other person, but also this is a woman who's married to someone else, and how dare you even make remarks about another man's wife? And how dare you focus on this person's physical appearance as opposed to the fact that she has been such a wonderful hostess to us? And he goes even further. Not only does he rebuke him by saying this, but then he sounds 400 trumpets and excommunicates the student. An extremely harsh punishment. Now, the first question we can ask is, does this punishment fit the crime? Is it appropriate, given what the student did, that he should be excommunicated? Probably not. That seems like a pretty harsh thing to do. Every day the student came before the rabbi and pleaded for him to forgive him, for the rabbi, for his teacher to forgive him, but the rabbi would not receive him, would not see him. One day, Rabbi Yehoshua was reciting the Shema when the student came before him, and Rabbi Yehoshua intended to receive him. In other words, now was the time, after all of these attempts by the student to gain forgiveness and acceptance from his teacher. Finally, now, the rabbi was going to forgive him, and he made a sign to him. In other words, since it's the middle of the Shema, and traditionally during the Shema, you're not supposed to talk. You're supposed to go through the Shema completely focused, and that's why there's no break usually during the Shema. You're just supposed to go straight through it without breaking it up, and that's why, for example, if you are in the sitting position before the Shema, you're supposed to stay in the sitting position because you're not supposed to get distracted during the Shema. So this is one of the debates. You have some communities where they're standing during the Shema, in which case usually they're standing from the Baruch Hu all the way through the end of Shema, because you're not supposed to break up that time. Or other communities, which is a little bit more traditional, where you stand for Baruch Hu, then you sit down and you remain sitting through the Shema for the rest of that part of the service. Which, by the way, is my preference, but we can talk about that another time. Okay, so he makes a sign to his student. Basically, since he can't talk, we can assume he's kind of going like this, or he's telling him something. But the student, thinking that the hand motion was to push him away, went up, took a brick, and worshipped it. In other words, that was the last straw. And this student has now felt as though he has no opportunity to gain forgiveness from his teacher. And he goes away, he takes a brick, he sets it up, and he worships it like an idol. In other words, he turns to idol worship, and he becomes an idol worshiper. And subsequently, Rabbi Yeshua says to him, repent. Right? Now he comes back and says, what are you doing? How dare you go and become an idol worshiper? And the student replies, I have thus learned from you, whoever sins and causes others to sin is not given the opportunity to repent. You were so harsh that when someone sins and causes other people to sin, there is no opportunity to repent. Now here he could be talking about himself, but I think this is also a teaching. He's talking and referring to his teacher. He's also talking about Rabbi Yeshua, who sins and causes others to sin and is not given the opportunity to repent. In other words, now he's returning back to his teacher and saying, it's too late for you as well. And this is your punishment. And a master has said, another teacher has said, this student practiced magic and led them astray and caused Israel to sin. Now, by the way, you should know that in some translations of the Talmud, you will find that they actually say that the student here is Yeshu the Nazarite, or Jesus. So you don't actually, it doesn't actually say that in the text, most of the texts that I looked at. But there is one interpretation that does exist out there, that this is referring to the student being Jesus, and therefore making a connection with this being what led Jesus to leave the fold of the rabbinate and to become the leader of the Christian world. So those are the two stories. The second one, I think, really is about this idea that you can go too far. When you are unwilling to go into a conversation of forgiveness, it not only affects you, but what that does to the other person is profound. That this rabbi's inability to offer any consolation or to repair that relationship with the student led his student not only to be pushed away, but to sin even greater, to become something else. That our inability to mend the relationships that we have in our lives can lead people to truly change for the worse. That's what this story is saying. That we can actually help in the wrong way someone go down the wrong path. And I think, again, about the ugly man story, which we looked at before, and this idea of ugliness that is built up with, and that can exist within each one of us, and the rage that we can feel, and the frustration and the disappointment we can feel when we are wronged is completely valid. And yet, both of these stories seem to suggest we somehow need to not get over it. That's not the right word. But we need to deal with it in a way that can at least really try and find some kind of reconciliation. Now, the question can be, what if you can't reconcile? What if someone has hurt you so bad that you can't ask for forgiveness? That's an excellent question. I don't have the easy answer. And these stories aren't addressing those situations. These stories are really addressing the situation where it doesn't matter how bad they wronged you. You almost have a responsibility, I think these stories seem to suggest, to try and come to some reconciliation. You have to at least do your part. You can't control what the other person is going to do and how they're going to respond to you. But if you don't engage in an appropriate, healthy way of trying to find a sense of tshuva, then it's not going to end well. So I'm more curious what you all thought of these. Nan asks, one may forgive but not forget. Is that really forgiveness? Well, I mean, according to what you just said, one may forgive and not forget. You're right. You can actually forgive, and there is no there. You don't have to forget. So yes, you can really forgive without forgetting, because let's be honest, we're not going to forget the times we've been hurt. Someone, it can still be your friend even after you, let's imagine a time where you've had some kind of conflict with a friend where you have made up, but you're not really ever going to forget the fact that you had that conflict. You may be able to move forward from that, and of course ideally have a healthy relationship that you can continue to expand the connection that you have through that conflict and through the forgiveness that you've come to terms with that other person. But it doesn't mean you're forgetting, and I don't think our tradition wants us to forget anything. I mean, think about the centrality of Zachor, of remembrance, the Yisker service, which we will have on Yom Kippur, but of course, everything that we have that reminds us of our history, the fact that our stories in the Talmud, the prayers in our prayer book remind us of what came before us, all the good and the bad, right? And we're not supposed to forget any of those things. And that's the real challenge of forgiveness: is how can you forgive without forgetting? Because I don't believe that our tradition wants us to go down the road of forgetting, because we know what happens when people forget. More danger comes to our society and to our culture when people forget what happened before. So we're supposed to remember, definitely remember, and move forward with that. Okay, Steve put a great quote from Numbers. The Lord's slow to anger and abounding in kindness, forgiving iniquity and transgression, yet not remitting all punishment, but visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon children, upon the third and fourth generations. Great. Okay, and I'm curious if you want to expand on that. So I will let people, if they have their hands up. I see a couple hands already. And also, if you think about it, on Yom Kippur, we're going to hear Adonai, Adonai, Elorachum v'Chanun. We have the 13 attributes of God. We have this idea of God being compassionate, of caring for us, even though we do wrong. And if we also then hearken back to Leviticus 19, that we shall be holy because God is holy. We have responsibilities in how we act in the world in order to be God-like, not to be God, but to bring holiness, more holiness into the world in the way we act, in the way we treat one another. So I'll turn it to Merle. Hi, Merle.
Hi. So this is a good discussion for me, because I admit that I tend to carry grudges, and it's personal, because about a year ago I was insulted about my handicap by someone who is a very dear friend, and my reaction was so awful that it took Arnie and Sharon a whole day to calm me down. But then it also took Arnie that he picked up the phone and called this guy and discussed it with him. And he finally called, this friend called me not too long after Arnie talked to him and apologized to the point where I think he was in tears. We both were, I'll admit it. And because I didn't want anything to happen to this relationship, but there isn't a time that we're with this couple, and it's frequently, that I don't have that in the back of my mind. Will he ever forget what he said, or will he make another comment about the fact that I walk with a cane or a walker? And it still sits in my head to this day, and it's been at least a year, and it doesn't go away. Yet I'm not carrying a grudge anymore, because I think I feel more sorry for him that that's how he felt than me, because that's who I am, and I have this handicap, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, thank you, Merle. And you're right, you probably never will forget it. And your relationship with this person is probably forever changed. It doesn't mean it's not a relationship that clearly you can maintain that relationship, but I think you're voicing what so many of us have gone through, which is we are hurt dearly by someone, and there can be that point where we have some reconciliation, where there is some forgiveness, and then we still remember that, and the relationship is different. And I think that's the reality of our relationships, and it's very difficult for us to go through any meaningful relationship without having those moments where we see the underbelly of someone else and see that dark side, and And in some cases, that can lead us to come closer to some people. And in other times, that leads to the shift in that friendship in ways that are forever changed. And so I guess the question for you, Merle, is do you feel like you have fully forgiven him?
Um, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Um, I feel like I have forgiven him, but the thought of what happened still is back in my mind. I mean, we're very close, and we travel with them, and we do a lot of stuff with them. Yet I keep, so it's never going to go away from the back of my head, but at least it's a good relationship. And I think he knows that it's never gone away from the back of my head because he's never teased me to that extent again.
Hmm.
I'm hoping, at least for his side.
Yeah, me too. And
Thank you.
sometimes, yeah, and sometimes there are those relationships where sometimes we need to remind people that they hurt us, and not as a way of guilting them, but if something continues to stick with us, that usually means there's still something that hasn't been resolved there that may need to come out, that may need to be voiced, that may need to require another level of conversation. So it's something to think about. And Merle, in your case, it may. And I'm not telling you, of course, what to do. I'm saying that maybe if you continue to feel that weight, maybe it's something that since you still do have a relationship with this person, that there's another way to have that conversation that can continue to work. So you can continue to work on that relationship and work through this challenge. So thank you, Merle. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Okay, Susan. Hi, Susan.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. I have a few questions and then something, or maybe I'll point to the something already, and then ask you the little questions. Rabbi, her eyes are round, narrow. To me, that doesn't totally make sense because round would suggest a more wide-eyed person because you can see, their pupils fully, and narrow would be limited, constricted. So the question is this a metaphor? And how often eyes are considered windows of the soul. They say that about Mona Lisa's eyes following you around the room. We talk about Leah. The first thing we know about her is that she had bad eye, or poor eyes. Or
Weak eyes, right?
weak eyes, something that, bothers me because I wear glasses and I thought, that's no way to judge a person. But could there be a metaphorical situation here that the student was referring to? And then this rabbi went over the top with this. Now, is that, an expression of his power over the student? And, and certainly, rightfully, he turned him away and made him go, to idol worship. So I asked that about the eyes. Then I'm confused about the second thing is King Yanai killing rabbis. Was he I didn't see him as part of the Hashemonian dynasty, but who was a king killing rabbis? I mean, is that, our history, or is this just a midrash? And the second thing on that same story, he fled from Jerusalem, the holy city, to you, Alexandria in Egypt, my sister. Who's the sister there? And then my master dwells within me, meaning God dwells within you, and I am desolate because you're not here bringing back God to me. So those are the three things.
Okay, great. In terms of the eyes, I would say that I found different translations of the word there. And so you could either see it as narrow or you can see it as round. So you could read it, I guess I included both because you could read it either as he was suggesting she was beautiful and he was looking into her eyes as a way of, in a suggestive way, or he was looking at her eyes in the sense of being narrow, in the sense that he was seeing her as as not beautiful. Whether that was kind of a racist comment he was making in terms of that she looks different from other people, whether it was just the fact that there was a narrowness in terms of how she looked. I think I was reading it more, of course, on the ways in which she was attributing her physical description. But yes, of course, you could read it even deeper than that. And maybe he was just pointing out, maybe he was making an observation about some other piece of this hostess that the rabbi wasn't aware of. And regardless of how the student was interpreting the eyes, the rabbi responds in a way that is so extreme that we have to wonder, well, what did that trigger for the rabbi? And I think that's the key thing here is sometimes we get triggered and we go into a state of being furious or feeling like we have been wronged because something that someone else does triggers something in us, even if they didn't necessarily mean to. And the results can lead to, in this case, excommunication and then idol worship. It can lead down a path that is very dangerous. And so without him giving his student the opportunity to actually have a conversation with him by continually pushing him away, neither of them are really able to ever explain what really was going on. They don't allow for that process to happen. And really, in this case, it's really the rabbi who doesn't allow that to happen. And as a result, this is a teaching about how the rabbi, the person with authority, fails the student. And it's again, I think the rabbi's self-critique for themselves as those who were teachers of other students. What does it mean to be a teacher? And what does it mean? And many of us can be teachers in all kinds of ways, whether that's in parenting, whether that's literally as a teacher, whether that's as a mentor, in a variety of settings. This is also, I think, a lesson about what does it mean to teach someone a lesson and to try and guide them on a path. In this case, there's a line that is also found on that page of the Talmud that says you should push with your left hand and bring closer with your right. That as a teacher or anyone in that kind of environment, there are times where you have to say, no, that's not okay. But you can't push away with both hands. You have to have a hand that also tries to bring someone back to learn from that lesson and maintain that relationship and intimacy with you. In terms of Yanai, I didn't do enough research, to be honest, about the historical details of King Yanai and whether or not there's some historical background there that would play into the story or not. So I definitely urge you to do that. I did go through the story in Kiddushin 66a, which goes into the details of how he was connected, but because of he was connected to the priestly community, but there was something in his lineage that wouldn't allow him to become a priest. And so he wasn't a part of the priestly class, and as a result, this other fellow came and kind of played on his insecurities and played on his desire to be in control and have power. And as a result, the king listened to this man and ostracized the rabbis, and then first embarrassed them, then ostracized them, and then ended up killing them. So you should definitely go check that out if you want a little bit more context to that. In terms of the last question, which was in terms of the language used around the locations, I think that was more about a translation and more about this idea of this relationship between the student and the rabbi, and that just as sisters, or as this relationship, that they were apart, that they were separated when they should be together, and that this was about bringing the rabbi back to where he belonged, which is a place where he could be with his community in a different way. So thank you, as always, for your great questions. Dan, I'm just looking at the chat, and then I'll turn to Jeff. The evil men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. Okay, so Dan, if you want to riff on that, please raise your hand. Love to hear your thoughts on where you're going with that. And Jess also said, so does one form of forgiveness mean being civil and able to be in the same space, if nothing else? Yes, I think, well, I don't know if that's forgiveness per se, but I do think there is something here about the idea of civility, but that's different than forgiveness, because forgiveness requires an exchange and you can be civil in someone's presence without actually dealing with the issue that is laying under the surface that may kind of be the elephant in the room. So civility is a maybe on the path towards forgiveness. I think if you can be civil, you can maybe potentially get into a conversation that can lead more towards tshuva. And sometimes you don't need to be civil in order to still go through the process of forgiveness, depending on what happened and depending on the situation. So, great question. Okay, and Jess, since I just don't worry, Jeff, I'll get to you. But Jess, I wanted to open it up to you since you had asked that question and you raised your hand. Want to know if you want to.
Sorry, could I just follow up with what you're saying?
Please.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's I think you're absolutely right, obviously. But I guess it's this weird balance of where forgiveness and forgetting comes in. If you're sitting there and you're not forgetting, which I appreciated, that was a very difficult story for Merle. So I appreciate that you shouldn't forget. But if you're sitting there thinking about this constantly, is that what level? That doesn't seem like forgiveness. But it's also important not to forget and not to diminish your own feelings. So I appreciate it's complicated, but I guess where does this all sit in your opinion?
Specifically with Merle's case, or in terms of forgetting and forgiving?
Probably just whatever you think works best.
Yeah, well, I think as you point out, Jess, I think it is complicated and each situation is different, and your level of engagement with someone matters. I don't want to speak too much for Merle, go and use her completely as the example, but as she pointed out, she's still in close contact with this person, and there's a friendship and a partnership with the families where they get together. So I think part of the forgiving and forgetting is also about how often you come into interactions with these people that you are forgiving. And I think also it goes into all the challenges and what it is that we're forgiving them for. We can't forgive them for the pain that we're feeling within ourselves about our own challenges. Because some of the times what people are doing is they are bringing light to either our own insecurities, our own history, something that we've been working on and has challenged us in our own life, and we've been working through it. And then they say something, they do something that hits on something that really just kind of blows it all up. And so I think forgiveness also is not just about the other person. We also are going through the process of understanding, how do we forgive ourselves? How do we have compassion for ourselves? What is it that they are tapping into that is making sure that we are not forgetting, that even if we've forgiven them for what they did, we are not forgetting what they're touching on or what's still painful, the residue that sticks with it. So I don't know if that really answers your question, Jess, but I think those are some of the factors that also make this so complicated, and why I refer to the rabbi. Maybe when his student says something about this hostess, he kind of goes off to this crazy place of excommunicating his student, which seems ridiculous. So there's clearly something going on here, either with their relationship or with this rabbi and his understanding of hostess or women, or who knows what. Something's going on there. And so those are the things that can spark how we respond to other people and the level of forgiveness that we go through. So
that's an excellent answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. Okay, Jeff. Hi, Jeff. And then Dan.
Hi, Rabbi. 2 comments. One, I think forgiveness is such an integral part of Judaism. And you mentioned teshuvah any number of times. And the elements of this, in that sense, is that forgiveness and teshuvah is not for the outside event that occurred, but it's for the freedom to reestablish balance within yourself. In other words, those people who are unable to forgive truly have locked themselves into the past and have given up the present and the future. They've given up the ability to make those changes, those turnings necessary for forgiveness to be the essence of what teshuvah really does for the individual. The person is the one who benefits from the ability to truly forgive. And that actually, if we want to use anyone's example, it's an incomplete and rare quality for people to truly be able to forgive and live in the present and look forward to the future. The second comment is in reference to the rabbi, that this could be the nullification of one of his greatest teachings that the student made a comment on, being that everyone, regardless of appearance, is made in God's image. And it so infuriated the rabbi that he could deny the basic elements of all of his teachings to this student, that he was so angry that he could create a situation where he excommunicated this, because that's such an integral part of his beliefs and his teachings that it so affronted him that he could not excommunicate this individual because he hadn't learned anything.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Two really great points. Thank you very much. Dan. Hi, Dan.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I think that in terms of the question, how do you get to forgiveness? It's been said that to understand is to forgive. To understand is to forgive. And so I think you find that people who want to get to forgiveness are looking for a way to understand the other person. And when someone feels they need to be angry, they are not interested in understanding the other person. So
Great.
I think that a person who is angry, they might need a little bit more from the other person to motivate them to want to understand that person. Some people are just by their nature forgivers and forgetters, and they are always looking for a reason to find that the person who seemed to be malicious was actually just an innocent person who was maybe having a bad day or something like that. So once I had someone who was a friend of mine who was really abusing the heck out of me, but I didn't take it, personally. And so years later, she said to me, I remember when I just abused you so much. And I said, when was that? And she says, I can't believe it, but not only did you forgive, but you totally forgot. So it does actually happen sometimes, and I think understanding is how you get there.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Yes, and I think what you also bring up that stands out to me is this idea of understanding, which requires asking questions. We've talked about that before too. If we are going to go through this process of tshuva, it requires asking lots of questions of ourselves, of the other person, of really trying to understand where we are, where this other person is coming from. It doesn't negate the need for forgiveness, but it can help clarify what it is that we're asking forgiveness for. Because it's one thing to say, will you forgive me, right? Of course, we know that blanket statements in general don't go very far and don't have the depth and the roots necessary to really hold on for a long period of time. But the more specific we get, that's why really good stories really do something for us, because really good stories somehow create the way in which we can see the details, and the more details, the more ownership and buy-in we have to that story or anything else. And then we can get down to the real essence, right? The core of what's going on. And that requires understanding, that requires the need to ask lots of questions. So thank you very much, Dan, for that. Anyone else have there was some things in the Q&A here I want to look at. Sydney, my mother, asks, does the student owe the hostess an apology? If we don't know we've wronged another, is an apology owed as well as to those who may witness it? Again, does the student owe the hostess an apology? If we don't know we've wronged another, is an apology owed as well as to those who may witness it? That's a very good question. I think yes. Well, does the student owe the hostess an apology? in this case, if the student said that and the hostess heard, I would say yes. If the student said that purely just to the rabbi and the hostess didn't hear, I don't think that the rabbi, that student necessarily owes an apology to the hostess, because by apologizing to the hostess for something the hostess didn't know was going on and she wasn't affected by it, does that actually create more challenges and more problems than existed before? And that in this case, the student would have to apologize to the rabbi for, as Jeff pointed out, his inability to really hold on to all the teachings that his rabbi had taught him, and for him to say, I'm sorry, you're right. You've taught me everyone is made in the image of God, or you taught me that to be focused on the sexuality and physicality of another person is not the way to go. I hope you apologize for my misstep or for my failing to learn that. That's different. So I think there are two different situations. For example, there's a story, teaching in the Talmud about a bride who is really ugly, but on her wedding day, are you required to be completely truthful with her, or are you more supposed to tell her what you should be saying in order for her to have a meaningful and happy wedding day? And the rabbis say, you lie to her. You don't tell her she's ugly. So that there are certain situations where you don't want to add more conflict than necessary. David asks, what about Rabbi Huna's comment that Abba was going to kill the butcher? Did Abba kill the butcher? If so, what was the source of that power? Okay. Did Abba kill the butcher in the first story? No. The butcher killed himself in a way. Actually, I guess it would be God in some kind of way. I think what the story is trying to teach us is that the student Rav Huna understood that by going into a conflict zone with someone who was unable to see forgiveness as an option, the butcher in this case, that his inability, that him walking into that situation and into that war zone was going to lead to the death, and not to the death of the rabbi, because the rabbi, has a stature and is a certain type. I think that's why the story would go that way and suggest that it's the butcher who was unwilling to recognize the importance of tshuva, that he was responsible for his own death. That just as he can't forgive, he was unable to even do his job in a way that he wasn't able to pay attention to the things that were going on on his own table. I don't know. That my feeling here is that this is a self-induced death brought on by the butcher's inability to really do a process that was necessary. And then Susan says, my notes suggest that Yanai was a pro-Sadducee Hasmonean king who prosecuted the Pharisees. Susan, you want to riff on that a little?
Yeah, that was just in my notes, and then I quickly went to Google, and Google confirmed it. And there was great tension in the Hasmonean dynasty. I know that. Now, two other things too. The rabbi said, you said that you always say the bride is beautiful, even she's really physically ugly. I remember the outcome. Wasn't that a Hillel and a Shammai camps? And that the answer was all brides are beautiful when they're married. So that gave them the rationale.
Yes.
There's another saying, there's a saying, don't insult the deaf. And with regard to the question, you have to apologize to the hostess. If she hadn't heard, you still are not supposed to insult those who don't hear. It's not just physically deaf, but those who are out of your range. That's in the Talmud.
It's also, and it comes from Leviticus 19.
Oh, it does. That's right.
Don't insult the deaf and don't place a stumbling block before the blind, which of course,
Right.
both of which are symbolic, not just physical.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you. What occurred to me was the tremendous reaction of Yehoshua. My parents were both psychologists, and that just sounds like reaction formation. He was to do with sexuality. He was taken in with this hostess. Now, yes, about how nice he was. He was taken in with himself that he got such a an honor bestowed upon him. But I wonder if he was so upset by that, by the student interfering with his sensual delight of the hostess.
That is completely possible, given what we've seen in prior stories about the rabbis and their sexuality. So I wouldn't put it past them for that. So yeah, thank you, Susan, for all of that. All right, Jeff, last comment before we wrap it up.
I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for this series that you've put on and all of the hard work that you did in picking the stories and researching your comments based on the stories. So I wanted to thank you and hope that with the new season coming up, we'll be able to enjoy other elements of sharing through Zoom or otherwise. So
Yes,
thank you.
thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. And yes, that's a good transition to. We have 2 more sessions. We have next week, and then we have our finale, our siyum, the following week. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we usually have about 20 to 25 people on this learning together. So if you are one of those people who would like to share some insight and do a little bit of teaching to us on camera for just a couple of minutes about a piece of a text that stood out to you over the course of your learning here, even if it was a text that you weren't participating in that session, but you've now gone back and looked at them. They're all on our website, and something stands out to you, we'd love to give you the opportunity to teach us as well. So thank you all very much. Gamar Chatima Tova, as we say, approaching Yom Kippur, which is may you be inscribed in the book for good. Wishing you an easy fast and a meaningful Yom Kippur, one that of course will still be distant, virtual, but I hope that it gives you actually the space to delve deeper into the meaning of this holiday in a way that you can't necessarily do when you are in a room packed with hundreds and thousands of other people. So wishing you a day of meaning on Yom Kippur, wishing you the process of tshuva. May you be able to go through that process of forgiveness with yourself, with God, and with those in your own life. And look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks so much.